Muy buenos días, señoras y señores. Les agradecemos participar en el día de hoy en este seminario que va a presentar el estudio Manufactura Textil, lecciones extraídas de la pandemia. Durante el mismo se hará presentación del estudio y luego habrá un espacio para preguntas y respuestas. Les invitamos a participar enviando sus preguntas a través del botón de Q and Answer y en ese espacio les daremos respuesta. Igualmente el informe les será enviado a la finalización del seminario en los próximos días. Paso la palabra a la señora Carmen Madrid, asesora principal de operaciones del Departamento de Países de Centroamérica, Haití, México, Panamá y la República Dominicana del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Muy buenos días, señora Madrid.
Muchas gracias y muy buenos días, y quisiera dar la bienvenida a los funcionarios de las embajadas, las agencias de promoción de inversiones y las cámaras del sector textil de Centroamérica, República Dominicana, Haití y México que nos acompañan este día en la presentación de este estudio que analiza el estado de las cadenas de valor del sector textil y que brinda recomendaciones para su fortalecimiento en el contexto post-pandemia. Quiero agradecer a Jaime Granados y a Nicole Bivens por su liderazgo en la preparación de este estudio. El fin de semana pasado, el presidente del Banco Interamericano presentó a nuestros gobernadores la visión de la institución para el periodo 2021-2025. Uno de los pilares de esa visión es el fortalecimiento de la participación de las empresas de nuestra región en las cadenas globales de valor. El proceso de reconfiguración y regionalización que están experimentando estas cadenas por el interés de las grandes empresas multinacionales de darle mayor seguridad a su cadena de suministro, aprovisionándose de insumos desde lugares más cercanos a sus mercados, representa una oportunidad muy interesante para nuestros países. Como ustedes saben, además del incremento en el comercio y los beneficios que esto conlleva, avanzar en la integración en las cadenas de valor tiene beneficios adicionales para los países que participan en ellas, incluyendo un aumento de productividad, la generación de más y mejores empleos y la transferencia de tecnología hacia las economías locales. En nuestra región existe una gran oportunidad para ampliar el alcance del comercio e inversión en aquellos sectores en los que hemos demostrado ser competitivos en los mercados internacionales. Tal es el caso del sector textil, que representa un porcentaje importante de las exportaciones a los Estados Unidos y a otros destinos y que tiene una incidencia vital en la producción y el empleo de nuestros países. Como es de su conocimiento, la pandemia del COVID-19 afectó fuertemente al sector textil de nuestra región, en algunos países de manera similar o superior a la recesión derivada de la crisis financiera del 2008. Si bien en los últimos meses el sector ha experimentado un crecimiento en los flujos de exportaciones, estos aún siguen siendo inferiores a los niveles anteriores a la pandemia. En definitiva, la crisis actual dejó en evidencia una serie de desafíos y oportunidades para hacer las cadenas de valor vinculadas al sector textil más resilientes y adaptables a eventos contingentes y al nuevo contexto mundial del comercio. Es así que el presente estudio adquiere una gran relevancia al identificar medidas concretas, tanto a nivel nacional como regional, que permitan fortalecer al sector textil a través de diversas áreas de acción, incluyendo mecanismos de coordinación, diálogo supranacional, iniciativas de innovación, la atracción de nuevos inversores y socios, y la revisión y aprovechamiento de los tratados comerciales en vigor, entre otros. El banco está listo para acompañar a los países en esta agenda a través del fortalecimiento de las agendas de promoción de inversiones, de la mejora en infraestructura física y digital del comercio y de la modernización y armonización de acuerdos comerciales y marcos regulatorios y normativos. Agradecemos a los funcionarios de las embajadas de la región encargados de los asuntos comerciales por impulsar esta iniciativa desde sus inicios y por su acompañamiento durante la realización de este estudio. Esperamos que este producto sea de su interés y que contribuya a identificar e implementar medidas para el fortalecimiento del sector textil de nuestra región. Sin más, nuevamente les agradezco su participación. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, señora Madrid. Ahora pasamos la palabra al señor Jaime Granados, jefe de la División de Comercio e Inversión de la Unidad de Integración y Comercio del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Keila. Muy buenos días, señoras y señores. Bienvenida, Carmen. Bienvenida, Nicole. Creo que es muy propicia la ocasión aquí para recordar algunos de los elementos de coyuntura que ya quiso introducir Carmen, pero quiero expandir un poquito más para acotar muy bien el contexto en donde estamos enmarcando este estudio en particular. El estudio fue solicitado, como lo señaló Carmen, por ustedes, los países, el año pasado. Y durante su ejecución sucedieron una serie de cosas sumamente importantes que dieron necesidad o que nos obligaron a cambiarle un poquito el enfoque, ¿verdad? Sabemos que vino la pandemia, que es absolutamente traumatizante para las cadenas de valor, y no solo las cadenas, sino las cadenas de distribución también y de venta. Vino también la aprobación del TEMEC entre Estados Unidos, Canadá y México. Vino una serie de acciones legales en términos de cumplimiento, de enforcement de derechos humanos y derechos laborales en Estados Unidos y en Canadá, sobre todo en temas de trabajos forzados, que tiene también una dinámica importante para lo que vamos a hablar acá. Hubo una proliferación de comercio electrónico en este momento, ya no solo por virtud del consumo de textiles, sino en general por razón de la pandemia. En algunos países, por ejemplo, aumentó hasta un 40% el comercio electrónico internacional, ya no solo el doméstico, sino el internacional, que es algo que no tenía precedentes. De tal manera que hubo una gran cantidad de elementos que intervienen en la necesidad de revisar la coyuntura en la que estamos y ver cómo esos elementos inciden en la competitividad de las cadenas y qué oportunidades abren y bajo qué condiciones se pueden aprovechar esas oportunidades. Es sobre eso lo que vamos a hablar con ustedes del sector público y del sector privado. Esta actividad se enmarca dentro de un proceso más amplio que desde el banco hemos estado impulsando en términos de análisis de la reconfiguración de las cadenas globales de valor y las oportunidades que se abren para América Latina y el Caribe, en productos concretos, pero también en sectores concretos y para las naciones. De hecho, estamos haciendo 26 análisis, uno por país, para determinar cuáles son los low hanging fruits, cuáles son las oportunidades, cuál es la ruta crítica para el aprovechamiento de esas oportunidades, tanto a nivel nacional como a nivel subregional y nivel regional, de tal manera que seguiremos durante todo este año 2020 presentándoles a ustedes, ofreciéndoles a ustedes materiales de esta naturaleza, tanto de interés para el sector público como para el sector privado. ¿Por qué? Porque, bueno, la coyuntura es muy particular y estamos muy claros que la reactivación económica pospandémica pasa por atraer inversiones, pasa por buscar encadenamientos productivos. Muchos de los países tienen grandes oportunidades en este tema y no queremos que pasen desapercibidas. De hecho, vemos esto como una oportunidad, una especie de 15 minutos de oportunidad que tienen los países y no queremos que se desperdicien. Y que el banco está a disposición de ustedes, brindando no solo productos de conocimiento, sino sobre todo poniendo a disposición toda la cartera, todo el pipeline de recursos financieros y no financieros para aprovechar estas oportunidades que se abren. Lo dejo aquí entonces y luego iremos resolviendo los temas prácticos de logística en cuanto a preguntas y respuestas. Ustedes las podrán poner, como dijo Keila, en el espacio de Q&A. La presentación de Nicole será en inglés. Ustedes podrán presentar las preguntas en inglés o en español. Nosotros iremos filtrando y traduciendo esas preguntas a Nicole. Así que adelante, señoras y señores. Nicole, perdón, Keila, adelante.
Muchas gracias, Jaime. Pasamos la palabra ahora a Nicole Bivens, consultora internacional, presidenta de Comercio Internacional y Relaciones Gubernamentales de la firma Sandler, Travers & Rosenberg, basada en Washington, D.C. Thank you, Nicole. You have the word.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation with everyone. It's just to guide the conversation. It's not really that informative, but hopefully it's going to guide us if it will open fully. There we go. So hopefully everyone can see the screen and the slides as we go through them. I want to thank the IDB for the opportunity that you gave me to do this study. I think for me, a lot of the information that you'll find in the report is not just anecdotal, but it gave me a chance to consult specifically with people who were involved in this. And I just want to say, I am at Sandler, Travis & Rosenberg. It is a law firm. I'm not a lawyer, and just making sure you understand that what I'm giving you is not legal advice. I have to say this every time, just because some people try to take what I have presented to them and use it as, well, our lawyers said. No, your lawyers didn't say that. So the best thing about the report and preparing the report for me was my opportunity to speak directly to retailers, to the brands, to speak to the manufacturers, and to talk to some of the associations. We looked at what has happened during the pandemic. How have the companies responded? How have the brands responded? What did we see from the government perspective? How did the governments respond to it? And what was the perception of the manufacturers in country to the government's response? Was it helpful? Did it harm you? What coming out of this, what do we see could be improved? And coming out of the pandemic, what do we see might need to be changed to address the way the world is changing? So I conducted a series of interviews with about 30 people, also did some desktop research. You'll find in the report, there is a significant section that really examines from an economic viewpoint, what is the current integration? How are these countries, I refer to them as the study countries, how are these countries currently integrating? And where could they improve on that integration? And you'll see that there's a lot of data showing information as to who's trading with whom, who's importing with whom. And it shows you as a region, and it shows you as countries, specific countries. So what we tried to focus on were individual actions by the countries, as well as on a region, as I mentioned. We also wanted to focus on how were the brands and retailers responding. But then what is more curious is, as I got into this report, is I really found that the pandemic was having more of an impact on consumers than I think anyone had anticipated. And that impact, we believe, is going to remain. So we'll discuss that a little bit more. Let's talk first about how did the brands and the retailers respond to this. One of the things that I found most frequently stated by the global sourcing managers with the large organizations that I interviewed is they talked about a rebalance. They looked, and they may have been global, having a certain percentage in China, a certain percentage in Central America, a certain percentage in Bangladesh, and maybe some more in Vietnam. What they found through the pandemic is, as the pandemic moved across the globe, if they were in multiple countries, they had a push and a pull at many, many points. So just as soon as they felt like they might be dealing with the problem in one country, another country would get it, and that country might supply inputs into the manufacturing country that had finally cleared the problem with the pandemic, so that it still suffered. So they were finding that they were getting hit not one time, not two times, but sometimes 4 and 5 times, complete stoppages in productions or stoppages in their supply chain. What they realized is they need to change the way they're doing things. It's not that they want to stop producing globally, but they need to look again at what they're doing. And interestingly, almost all of them have said that they have undertaken that, and they are starting to reposition and to rebalance. What that could mean is moving more of their trade away from Asia and more of it into this hemisphere. And that another approach leads to another approach that was really key and mentioned several times, which is what they're calling a hub and spoke approach. Many of the brands, particularly with which I spoke, they are global. Now, some of the big box retailers, they're really located here in North America. You're not going to see Walmarts in China or Walmarts in Brazil, but you are going to see potentially Tommy Hilfiger or Donna Karan products in Brazil and in China. So the brands have a different approach from the retailers, but many of the brands who are global in nature said that they want to start looking at taking and sourcing, if they are marketing their goods in Asia, that they manufacture in Asia. If they are marketing the goods in North America, they would be manufacturing in the Western Hemisphere. If they are marketing the goods in Europe, that they will probably look at manufacturing in Africa. So this type of approach is really narrowing it, and you can see it along, the hemispheres or the continents as they're putting their production. Now, part of that is this idea of verticality and sustainable production. I'm sure you've heard over the last 5, if not 10 years, many companies talking about becoming more vertical and starting to change their supply so that they are more sustainable. And part of that sustainability, the way one of the global sourcing directors explained it to me is that they've had for years sitting around the table during discussions at the C level, the corporate leadership level. They've had the person who represents purchasing, the person who represents corporate social responsibility, the person who represents sustainability and environment. And inevitably, when they would go around the table asking for ideas about how to address some of these concerns, that the CEO would generally look to the global procurement or global sourcing managers and would go with whatever was going to be the lowest cost. Then there was a lot of pressure, as you know, by many, mostly consumers and non-governmental organizations, to address some of the worker rights issues. And then the corporate social responsibility person began to be listened to a little bit more by the CEO. Now, the poor person who was doing the sustainability and the environmental studies generally sat at the back of the room saying, we need to do this. But when the CEO would ask, how much more is that going to cost? The CEO, possibly thinking about the shareholders, would say, that costs too much money. We're staying with the low cost. We're going to pay a little more for corporate social responsibility, but I'm not going to pay more for the environmental. That's changed. And what they're seeing is many of the companies are looking now at this pandemic as a reason why they have to become more vertical, why they need to talk about it in the same breath as sustainability. Because if you do move to producing in Asia for Asia, Western Hemisphere for North America, Africa for Europe, you're going to hopefully eliminate or to diminish severely the number of ships going back and forth across the ocean. That becomes part of your sustainability, addressing some of the climate change. As you know, this new administration in the United States is really focused on climate change. The European countries and other major markets were already focusing on climate change. They are starting to look at issues such as border taxes. In other words, if you have a product that was not made in a sustainable manner, when it arrives at the border, you're going to pay an additional tax. That is very much a potential. Some countries have already put something like that in place, but the European Union, for example, is looking at doing that on a global level. So sourcing managers with brands and retailers are saying, we might be able to, in the United States, we have a saying, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So if we are able to change our footprint to become more vertical, to become more of a hub and spoke, we can also address some of these sustainability climate issues. So we're seeing that is starting to really take root in many of the decisions that are being made about where to place sourcing and orders around the globe. The other is many of the companies and brands, particularly marketing here in the United States and in Canada, were focused on nearshoring. The idea of the exposure that they experienced during the pandemic was quite frightening for many, to be perfectly honest. And so the idea is there a way to bring it closer to our shores? Now, the study countries are absolutely perfectly positioned geographically for answering this call, the call to bring product more to our shores. There's also, as I mentioned, the idea of the e-commerce. I talked about the consumer behavior change, but when I spoke to the global sourcing managers at these companies in Canada and the United States, what they really mentioned is that they had been doing some e-commerce. They were seeing e-commerce steadily grow. They were seeing it starting to expand it, starting to put more resources into it. But what occurred during that pandemic was so exponential. The growth was just phenomenal. Many of them were not prepared, to be quite honest. Some of them were prepared. And it's interesting, there are some brands who are really focused on e-commerce and delivery to the consumer in their home, whereas some of the brands who may have retail operations in all 50 of the United States and have retail operations in Canada or Mexico, they're doing it a little bit differently, and they're using their retail stores as their e-commerce fulfillment centers. So it's a different approach, but it's the same idea of using the e-commerce as a way to really expand it. And as a result, they've all told me they're looking for companies that can help them get the product direct to the consumer. They are no longer, or they're really reconsidering this whole idea of a 90-day inventory. Many of the brands in the retail physical buildings, they had 90 days of inventory at any one time, either in the facilities or in their warehouses, nearby warehouses. But that's not necessary anymore. And what they're seeing is changing that whole paradigm that they've used for the last 40 years in sourcing, from importing, 40-foot containers, 53-foot trucks full of 53-foot trucks full of product and storing that in these warehouses, to shifting to a more, and we've always talked about this, just in time. But they really have seen that it is possible through the advent and the changes that came about during the pandemic. So they're really looking for those suppliers who have that ability. They're looking for partners to be able to provide these goods, to be able to ship directly to the stores, whether it's a store in Nebraska or a store in Miami, Florida. They need to know that they have a partner, and you guys, again, are all very well positioned geographically to be able to service that type of demand. Now, in talking with the manufacturers, and some of you I noticed are on the call, so I've spoken with you. We've gone through this together. But one of the things that I saw that most impressed me is the ability, the facility, and the speed with which companies quickly reorganize themselves. They were ready to shift immediately to providing protective, personal protective equipment, the PPE. That type of speed and agility and willingness to adjust and flexibility needs to be the standard. It should not be the exception. It should not be that this pandemic took that to show the entire supply chain, whether it's the yarn spinners, the fabric makers, or the garment makers, or any of the ancillary manufacturing operations. It should not have taken that pandemic to demonstrate you can move quickly. Things can move much faster. You can approve different fabrics by email or by video call. You no longer need to have this. What we saw, however, were problems in the government's overall response to this. And one of the things that in the discussions that I had with many of you as manufacturers is, what were the problems that you faced from a more of a regulatory process? For example, trying to switch to producing a type of a mask, a sample might be shipped to you in your country and then sit for 7, 10, 12 days at the customs at the local customs port. That's not acceptable. That's not your fault, but those are the governments that need to do it. And I think, as Jaime mentioned earlier, there is some low-hanging fruit. When we went through this exercise, we identified some of the barriers that the governments put in place. The lack of coordination, the lack of communication, the lack of clear lines of questioning. Again, it's on the countries and the governments themselves to try to take some of the lessons that we've seen that this pandemic has given us and making those changes. In addition, recognizing some of the changes that have come about, as I mentioned before, is to the way that your customers want to be serviced. There are some barriers that are governmental barriers to you participating in that fully. And we have to figure out a way to do that. We have to treat this as a life or death situation. We have to treat that the region has an opportunity right now, and we'll talk about some of the other factors that are influencing those opportunities right now, to resurge as a major supplier if the governments cooperate, if the private sector cooperates, and if you work with your US partners to try to build this. So it can be done. And the paper really points, and I will say that I was very straightforward with the problems. I know that some of the countries may argue, may contest some of the findings. They may object to their ability to be able to look at goods, to hold goods, the slowness that they process, the fees that they assess on outgoing packages. But we've got to, if the region wants to survive, it has to be a partnership between the government agencies and regulations that they put in place, the manufacturers, and your partners in the United States. With respect to the consumers, as I mentioned again, this was one of the most eye-opening to me, is that the e-commerce, the level at which this expanded. When I first started looking into it, before the pandemic started, 84% of all shopping experiences took place in a physical store. Since the pandemic, that is down to only about 20% is actually taking place. As a result of that, the e-commerce has absolutely expanded exponentially. People have become more comfortable with e-commerce. I will have to say, I'm one of the older people. You can see my gray hair. I was resistant. I would buy some things, but very limited things online. I was not an online shopper. But with the stores being closed, with my reluctance to go to shop, I became a fan. And I don't think I will go back to the level of in-store shopping ever again. When I can shop at 10:30 at night, that's fantastic for me. I don't have to hurry home from work, try to get to the store, try to fight with 65 people all trying to get the same green beans that I want at the same time. It's something that I have been convinced that it is a good thing to shop online. I'm not as worried about my data privacy. And my children, I have two kids in college, one's in grad school and one is in undergrad, and they already were very comfortable with shopping online. So that whole generation of about 30 and under were probably the majority of those who are shopping online. Now we've brought my generation online and everyone in between. So we're seeing this is going to happen. And most of the analysts in this sector predict that it is not going to go away. If there is a return, there might be a slight shift back to potentially a 50-50 split. But when you look at it before, when it was only 20% e-commerce and now it's going to be 50%, that's probably only going to grow. So companies, you as manufacturers, countries as exporters, need to be aware that you have an opportunity to service that because of your physical geographic location and proximity to the United States. So you need to take advantage of it. The other thing is that in 2015, there was a change to our laws, and we call it the Section 321 or the de minimis provision. Now, this unfortunately is also showing you your greatest challenge. So that's why I say that the countries need to look at what laws or regulations are restricting them, or what policies or procedures are restricting them in participating in e-commerce because of the 321 provision, which is opening up the e-commerce to every country. And that the provisions that the benefits that you have enjoyed by close proximity and duty-free entry into the United States, Canada, and Mexico is being wiped out. Let me explain. This provision allows that one person on one day can import or have imported to them a product or products duty-free, every type of tax-free, so long as the value of that shipment is $800 or less. If it's $900, I'm going to have to make a formal entry at our US Customs. I'm going to have to file the paperwork. I'm going to have to pay the duties on it. But if it's $799 US, that comes in duty-free. What does that mean? That means we're seeing this provision happened in 2015. It became effective in 2016. We had been speaking with many brands who were starting to look at taking their e-commerce, their fulfillment centers that might be in Ohio. They had a big warehouse full of all of their products that they would use to fulfill e-commerce orders. We were talking to them about moving that physically out of Ohio, putting it in Mexico or in Canada, and using that as the e-commerce fulfillment centers. Why? Because then I could import my products from Bangladesh or Vietnam or from China. I could import them into Mexico or into Canada. Because I'm going to export them into the US, they're not going to pay duties when they come into those territories. And then because I'm sending them direct to the consumer, I'm not going to pay duties on those goods going into the United States. So at this point, because of this provision, goods from China, from Bangladesh, from anywhere in the world have virtual duty-free access to the US market. And if they are locating them and creating that 90-day inventory outside the borders of the United States, the issue of geographic proximity and your advantage is also erased. So this has become a challenge. Many companies were thinking about doing it, but because e-commerce wasn't quite so large, they weren't doing it. Now, after the advent of the pandemic, they're doing it. What this means is that you as a region, you countries have got to find a way to wipe out or to prevent that from happening so that you're not competing on duty-free access into the United States for the Chinese goods, or you're not competing for the Bangladeshi or the Vietnamese goods. But as I said, there are barriers in countries. For example, I'm not going to name names on here. Look at the report and you can see who's been named. But there are some countries that for every box that is exported, there's a $16 fee. $16. Imagine if I bought this blouse for $20 and then you exporting it have to pay $16. My $20 blouse now is a minimum $36 to $40. You can't compete like that. But that's because of your host government's policies regarding exporting of goods. So that needs to be, those types of issues need to be dealt with to try to compete in this next level. The other thing is, if you look at the report, I've gone through country by country. Every single one of the countries in the report have a section dealing with the specificity of challenges that we found, whether it's with respect to allowing shift work. It's very limited in some countries. For example, your country may not be large enough to be able to compete with a China. We know that that doesn't happen. But if you have a facility that is only working 6 days a week for 10 hours a day, you're wasting another 14 hours of work per day that could be undertaken. So you can double, possibly triple your production capacity and output, as well as you may be able to double the workforce. So there are opportunities. If there's laws or regulations that restrict your ability to be able to use it or minimize your ability to use it, you need to address those, remove them so that you can increase your capacity immediately and you can increase potentially the employment. Those are things that we go through and look at specifically country by country. I mentioned the problems with goods of samples sitting in the customs for 7 or 8 days. That can't happen. We can't have that anymore. You need to have a sample arrives because it's just a sample. It's not something that needs to be processed by your customs. Again, it should be almost like a de minimis. That should go straight to the factory. Factory should be able to move on it immediately, eliminate some of these barriers. These are things that are very individualized, but they're low-hanging fruit. There are things that companies, if you help with your government to understand what's going on by looking at the horizon and what your competition is, you can help them to address this. We looked at the integration or lack thereof. There are great opportunities within yourself. You know, I talked about this verticality that some of the global sourcing managers are looking at. And what they've said is they recognize that not every state, nation can grow cotton, can spin cotton, can knit and weave or dye and print and produce the apparel. So if you take countries that focus on what is their strongest suit, and not everybody needs to do everything. You may do all of the, and I'm just making this up, the yarn spinning in Honduras, all of the fabric making in Guatemala, and all of the apparel making in El Salvador. You may do any combination of those, but looking at as a region, how to try to create that. And again, the sourcing manager said that having a smaller regional or vertical imprint versus this global spread out everywhere is what they're looking for. So as a region, taking some of the lessons that we're seeing from this and trying to focus on it. I know that there's been some tremendous advances in yarn spinning and yarn production in Honduras. We've seen some incredible fabric making that's going on in El Salvador, and Dominican Republic is making some great, has made great strides in some of their knitting processing. Mexico has always been a fabric maker, but the idea is how do we share that fabric and those yarns? What we did find is there's not a lot of trading going on between the Mexican yarns and fabrics and the Central American regions. Now, maybe part of that is because of the free trade agreement, the way it's written, right? You can't use the Mexican fabrics, but you can for some issues. The idea is also looking at an integration from the standpoint of how can we integrate our free trade agreements in the hemisphere? You know, there's probably some assistance I think that the IDB can do for the countries looking at more of an idea of and this is something that I've really focused on since having done this report, is the idea of using the USMCA as an anchor agreement to which the other FTA partners in the region dock onto, so that we create, it's almost a free trade area of the Americas. For some of you who've been around as long as I have, you remember that back in the 80s and 90s, and we could never get anywhere. I think we're in a totally different place. I think that there needs to be a counterbalance to the CPTPP, which was the former Trans-Pacific Partnership minus the United States, as well as a counterweight to the RCEP, the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership, to which China is a member. That is now the largest by GDP trading bloc. The second largest by GDP trading bloc is the CPTPP. The third largest is the USMCA. If we were to take and build more of a hemispheric approach, you would be able to have a free flow of the yarns and the fabrics among the partners. You would have a counterbalance to the strength that's being built by the RCEP and the CPP, and you would be able to have more of a geographically narrowed, more vertical supply chain. It represents sustainable production because you're not crossing back and forth across the oceans. There are a lot of boxes that such an arrangement would deal with, but these are opportunities to look at. The other thing is, you know, looking at your experience, all of the countries in the study are free trade partners with the United States or preferential trade partners with respect to Haiti. You have experience over the past 20 some years of tracking and tracing your inputs. You are required to maintain certificates from the yarn producer that this yarn was made in a partner country, that this fabric was made in a free trade partner country, that the apparel was made in a free trade partner country. You already have that in place. And what you're missing is that one step back from the yarn spinner to the farmer. Now, because most of your yarns are being made from US fiber, US raw fiber, tracking and tracing back to the farm where that piece of cotton came from, where, you know, whether it's in Nebraska or California or Georgia, you should be able to trace back to the farmer, to the farm, that information. And that's what companies are looking for right now. Why are they doing that? Because of the focus on forced labor. I'm sure you've seen all of this. There's a huge press by non-governmental organizations, by this administration, the Trump administration, and by Congress on ensuring that goods are not imported into our territories that are made using forced labor. There are detention orders being issued daily almost on importers of apparel and tomatoes and other products. But because you already have this experience, you just need to go back one step further. So part of it is developing that last step to go back to the dirt so that you can show, I have all the documents you need, and coming and partnering with the brands and saying, look, we are close geographically. We've got duty-free access. We can help you on your e-commerce fulfillment. We also can trace all the way back to the fiber, to the farmer. So we can help you get your goods in and you don't have to worry about there being forced labor in this. Add on to that, layered on top of that, is that the additional 25% tariff that's in place right now for goods coming in from China. That is all to your benefit. The idea is, can we take the lessons that we've learned, the speed and agility that we were able to operate, the change in the desires of global sourcing managers, the change in the desires of the consumer, can we take all of those and capitalize on it to try to transform into something that's going to show us a different perspective, and how can these countries, how can the study countries benefit? So we tried to look at all of those issues and present an idea of what are some of the changes that you can bring about either per country, and then also what are some of the changes that you can bring about by focusing on the region. And then as a group of the apparel, are there certain things that you could do from a perspective of marketing? You know, how could you launch something that is a joint marketing that outlines why they should be using U.S. goods? Should there be a marketing or a campaign in the United States to the social consumer, letting them know that, hey, these goods are made here, they're not made with forced labor, these provide jobs, meaningful jobs. When we think about what this administration is looking at from the perspective of root causes for immigration, you're providing jobs. How are you providing meaningful jobs? How are you providing good, ethically sourced product, as well as environmentally sourced product? All of these factors, can you put together some sort of a campaign that might be for all the countries to market to the apparels and brands, market to the consumers, using social media, using Instagram, using Facebook, using TikTok, that's so popular among the young people, getting them to understand it, getting them to also demand it. Those are opportunities. Then, as I said, internally, looking at your own government's policies and rules and regulations. Are there changes that could be undertaken that are easy? Well, I think they're easy. I'm sure everything always comes with a political calculation when you're doing it, but if the countries and governments are really looking at trying to undertake changes that are going to help the entities, the enterprises that are going to help the manufacturers, the ones who are providing the employment, the ones who are providing opportunities to the citizenry and to an industry that is one of the largest employers, I think that you have some clout, you have some weight, and that working together and not working so individually might be helpful. We all compete. We're all going to compete, but I think we need to look at the competition is not just each other, but it's also other countries. And right now, because of the confluence of the 301 tariffs on China, because of the focus on forced labor, you have an opportunity that you've not really had before. Layer that on top of the desire of the brands to do hub and spoke manufacturing, to minimize their carbon footprint, to become more sustainable and vertical in their production. You also have not had that focus before that you now have an opportunity. With respect to looking at the benefits among each other, there are, as I said, we looked at trade between and among all of the countries, and there are a lot of barriers that you've put in place to each other. Those need to be addressed and removed, because it's, if nothing else, I think what we've learned from the pandemic is that we've got to rely on each other, or we're not, any of us, going to be able to, we might survive, but we're not going to survive well. And we want to make sure that all of the entities are able to survive, that all of the countries are able to build back better, for lack of another term, and also to address some of the I guess, immigration issues that the United States is looking at. I think also by taking this approach, and if needed, seeking assistance from the United States government and taking advantage of this new administration early to go in and to explain to them what it is you're trying to do, how you want to help them in their efforts to stem the tide of immigration and get at that root cause. You need to do that through manufacturing. And the only way to do that is to build up here, but that you need their support. You need them to also put in place measures that are going to help you be able to make the change. And so I think it's a joint effort. And like I said, there are some individuals who are looking also at trying to integrate our free trade agreements to make them better. There are some countries who think that the USMCA agreement and its terms on labor and the environment are just too difficult, and there's a lot of political cost to undertake them. I suggest to you that that if you are put in a situation where you have to deal on a one-on-one basis, updating the CAFTA agreement, updating a preferential program, if you're put in that situation under the current administration, I can imagine that the terms on environment and labor will be much, much more difficult. So I sometimes think it's better to work with the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And you know the details, that the devil is in the detail. You know the details of the USMCA. Most of those provisions, particularly in the apparel sector, you already had them. Mexico now has had to actually take on more restrictive manufacturing processes and requirements than they had under the NAFTA, but all they did was really put it on par with the CAFTA provisions. So, there's a lot in there that I think as an industry you could think about trying to offer to this new administration as a way to address root causes of immigration, to address the building of nearshoring, and the ability to address some of the climate issues. All of those exist as an opportunity right now that we haven't had before. So I think I will stop there. I don't want to go on for too long. I think I was limited to 40 minutes. So with that, I will take a break and be happy to answer questions or have additional discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nicole. It was a very, very comprehensive overview of the many challenges and opportunities that now these countries have in order to take advantage of, or to frame their challenges within these new contexts. Thank you very much for this. We have a series of questions here and comments as well. We have one from Karine De Leon. She states that given the production of PPE, the challenges are probably a bit too cumbersome because the procurement processes here in the US are particularly difficult, and she's probably questioning whether there's a chance to streamlining these processes so as to fulfill all the orders that right now cannot be fulfilled. What is your view on those issues?
So I think this may be sort of getting at the question of the President Biden's executive order on the Buy America Act or Buy American Act. One of the things that in looking at the executive order, it hasn't made an exception for the trade countries. Historically, under the Buy America, Buy American Act, there is an exception that allows you to procure goods for government purposes from free trade partner countries. So all of the countries in the study are eligible, or least developed countries. So Haiti, even though it's not a free trade country, it's a least developed country. The other study countries are free trade partners, so they are eligible to bid on this. So it's right now, there's been no change to that process. So they're still going to be eligible. With respect to some of the approval processes, that's something that the administration has targeted, the new Biden administration has targeted as a priority, to be able to clear these goods and make sure that they are approved and meet the standards as quickly as possible. They did speed it up. Believe it or not, it actually was speeded up from where it was before. So, you know, we're hopeful that under the new administration, they are going to take additional steps. And that frustration was shared also by some of the apparel manufacturing. For example, I know there's some large manufacturers in the region who shifted their production over to masks, but then had so much difficulty trying to clear them through the USDA process, they wound up giving them to the countries for their own use. So there is a level of frustration, but I think that there is a concerted effort. But again, that's one of the issues that you as a region, as the study countries together, approaching the administration to say, here's one of the things we want to do. We want to help you nearshore. We're going to use US cotton if we do this. We're probably going to use US cotton yarn if we do it. We might even be using US fabric. So this is a win-win for both of us, but we have to eliminate some of these hurdles that you put in place from an approval process, and address them specifically. Say exactly what those hurdles are, how much time it took, come in with some solid evidence. I really believe that this administration is looking at ways to find win-wins for the region and for the US as well. So I think they're open to it.
Thank you. I have another question also from Karin De Leon regarding section 321. And she's asking whether there's any thought about increasing the threshold value of $800, the minimum provisions. And the follow-up question would be, would that decision be putting in risk, you know, the entire supply chain that the U.S. has established, given that none of those merchandises actually have to comply with the rules of origin?
So I don't think that the number is going to increase. There has been some requests, or I would say not requests, but there has been some pressure to decrease that amount. You may not know that the amount before it was increased to 800 in 2015 was 200. But again, in my research of the online shopping experiences and purchases, the average purchase was $156. So it's still below, excuse me, the 200 level. Even if we were to reduce the 800 back down to 200, most of the purchases online are still below that amount. So it's not going to change that dynamic. There was some pressure initially to try to change the 321 entries to impose the China 301 tariffs, because right now I can import something, let's say I use my Mexico facility as a e-commerce fulfillment center, and I've imported all kinds of goods from China. When I bring it in, I don't have to pay duties, nor do I have to pay the additional 25% or 7.5% Section 301 tariffs that are on China, on Chinese goods, because I'm not making an entry. This is not a formal entry into the United States. This is an informal entry coming to me. I'm allowed to bring in this much goods without paying duties. So there was an attempt to try to change that and at least impose, even if you let it in duty free, to impose the Section 301 tariffs. But that was a complete nightmare, to be perfectly honest, because you don't make a formal entry. You don't know what they are. You don't know to which goods to apply this. And so that basically has been scrapped. And right now, I don't know that this administration has formulated a position or an approach, but I mean, the truth of the matter is those products absolutely do not have to meet the rules of origin. Yeah. And again, and it may be something that you as countries who are manufacturing might start to think about. Would it be feasible for me, instead of using a US yarn or a US fabric, to use a Chinese yarn or Chinese fabric and have one line of my production facility that manufactures goods that do not meet the rule of origin for the free trade agreement, and another line that meets the rule of origin. And I use and manufacture these goods for e-commerce, and I manufacture these goods for my free trade obligations. I mean, you have a choice. You either kind of fight the tide or you learn to swim in parallel to it until you can reach the shore, right? So I mean, there's two ways to look at it. And I think the industry needs to consider what do they want to do or what's going to work best for them.
Thank you. Yeah, so it means basically that Section 321 can actually bypass all those forced labor enforcement provisions.
Right, there's nothing.
All right. I have another question here from Nora Ambris. Basically, he asks, regarding the opportunities for the Western Hemisphere, how can they collaborate among themselves and what kind of IDB guidance can they get? I will answer that. Which can be the next steps to do it? I'm just going to say very briefly that, yes, we're thinking on means and ways to address these questions. Let us recall that all that participation or all that request from the IDB participating and providing guidance and support for this kind of initiatives should come from the countries. We're considering having a regional policy dialogue by the end in the second semester, in which many of these issues will come into the discussion. So we're working into that. I don't know, Nicole, if you want to add something regarding the collaboration and the coordination among Western Hemisphere countries in order to achieve some of these goals.
Right, so if you look at the paper, we talk about sort of two different levels of regional cooperation. One is from a pandemic perspective, that the countries themselves need to figure out how are they going to operate, creating rules or policies that will apply on a regional basis so that you don't have a situation where one country is closing its border and the other country is not closing its border, but that they work and coordinate together. So there's one level of what we would call pandemic preparedness coordination that needs to happen, because this is going to happen again. I mean, we need to just face it, but we need to have a plan in place because we had nothing in place. So let's at least figure out who are the entities that are involved. Do you go to the health service? Do you go to the commercial service? You know, do you go to the presidencies? Who is going to be working this out so that if there is an instance that they can quickly organize themselves and coalesce around policies that are going to make it so that each country can still continue economically to function. The other is with respect to, from a competitive perspective, how are we going to collaborate on that? Again, I think that the IDB can serve an important role in all of this as well, is by bringing together and providing the guidance or the setting or the venue that looks at, from a regional perspective, what are the barriers that we have put in place against each other? How can we remove them? Again, I understand that many times these are politically sensitive questions and issues, but if you think of it from an overall perspective of the country's willingness or ability to compete, not against each other, but to compete against these large players, Bangladesh, India, China, Vietnam, to compete against them, you've got to address these, whether it's only with respect to the apparel industry, which I would hope it would not be, but if nothing else, segregating that, addressing the issues that are facing them, coordinating among each other so that you don't have those barriers. I think the IDB can help to convene that, identify those, and move it forward, as well as I think that the IDB can help support efforts by the countries if they decide that they're going to try to take an approach of integrating our existing free trade agreements.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much. It's now 11 o'clock. I have to wrap this up, but I want to say something regarding that. In the past, that has been a major part of our role, and I can give you some examples in the Central American area. Let us recall that we supported the country in formulating this trade facilitation regional strategy in 2015, which has been the umbrella framework for a lot of different interventions in trade facilitation. For instance, the modernization of land border crossings in Central America or Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama were covered under that agreement, under that framework, and now we're financing those projects with huge success, because the reduction in the times for clearance of goods and traffic and transit and both goods and passengers is completely reduced. We look forward to doing that also in the Northern Triangle, but those are just some examples. We are, for instance, also implementing the Central American digital trade platform, which is bound to be, put on the air later this year, which is also an interoperability mechanism that is going to interconnect the different single windows of the different countries and the national trade platforms, so that you can export or you can import your merchandise, and you can actually facilitate the transit of your merchandise through the different countries by inputting the data only in one country once, as opposed to repeating everything in every country. There are a lot of very, very important trade facilitation initiatives that we are deploying this year. We look forward to more. Regarding any efforts at the Western Hemisphere level, again, this is something that we are considering, but it's something that should come from the governments, from the private sectors to the IDB. There's this final question by Lucia Palacios. Is basically addressed to the IDB. Is the IDB going to tell the countries how to improve competitiveness and lines of action? Yes, that's what we do all the time. We have dialogues every year with the countries. We point out what are the pain points in every country regarding competitiveness. We discuss with ministers of finance and with the different ministries how to improve those hurdles and those bottlenecks in your competitiveness. Is part of what we do, and we will keep on doing it. So let me basically thank you, Nicole, and thank all the audience. Thank Carmen for your time here. We hope that this discussion has been useful for your interest. We believe it has been. So we look forward to new discussions of this nature on this sector or on other sectors as required by you, the interested parties. This is what we do. This is our core business. So we have an open door policy here, and we look forward to listening from you. What else and how else can we be of relevance, and how else we can support this kind of efforts. Thank you very much to everybody, and may you all have a good day. And thank you, Nicole.
Muchísimas gracias por su participación en el día de hoy. Como comentamos, recibirán un email en su correo electrónico con un link al reporte de Nicole. Agradecer de nuevo a los ponentes. Que tengan un buen día.